Hey guys, Brian here for Better Chess Training, and I'm going to do something a little different today. Today I'm going to be sharing a game from one of my young students, rated around 1030 USCF, and it's from a recent tournament that he actually did quite well in. He finished fifth out of 47 kids, under 1200. So very pleased with the result, but we always try to learn from our games. So I analyzed the game with him and shared some of my thoughts as well as asked him about some of his thoughts about the game. So I'm going to share those with you this video. So enjoy. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Here, my opponent, or I'm sorry, my student is playing the white pieces. His opponent is rated around 1,000 as well. Okay, so they start out with d4, 5, pretty straightforward, and c4 is the queen's gambit. I'm not going to focus too much on the opening lines, but but in this case, because if you're not aware of it, the idea here is to attack d5, and then if for some reason we take on c4, now white has a little opening line e4 here with a nice center. However, black played c6. This is the Slav, and supporting the d5 pawn. Knight to c3, putting more pressure. So in these d4, d5 openings, a lot of times there's a lot of tension here on this, a lot of pressure on this. Okay. Okay. Knight to f6 was played, defending. Knight to f3. So far, so good. And now black plays bishop to g4. And sometimes in this Slav formation, this is kind of what black's idea is to get this bishop out and play 6 at some point. And so whenever this happens, we've taught him that he should always look to playing something like queen to b3, attacking the b7 square. And that's what he played. He played queen. But in um, this particular case, uh, he has an even better move. Okay, and I'm going to show that to you. And that move here is knight to e5. And so the message I was trying to get across to him is that queen to b3 is actually a fine move as well, and it's something I had taught him before to look for. But in this particular case, because the knight is not actually pinned, back a move, not actually pinned, that we need to look at what else we can do here. And in this particular case, we can attack this bishop. Okay, so and knight to e5 actually ends up being quite a strong move. So in this case, let's say he plays bishop to f5 for example. Well, then we have quite a strong move here. For example, c takes d5. Then if he takes back, then we have here e4, which might be something that you might not think of, but let me just show you an example of what can happen here. Example, d takes e4, and then we have queen to b3, which, take a look at it, threatens checkmate 7, well as this pawn here. And so, for example, if we block it, so black can block the checkmate, and then we just grab this pawn. Now we're threatening here, threatening this rook, and checkmate again. Let's say black defends, then see here, we can even just play something c6. Okay, queen to c8, then bishop to a6. So this is actually a pattern here that I found when I was young myself. And so, for example, if he takes, then we're going to actually win this rook here. This rook is trapped. Bears for travel. Okay, so that's just an example. We won't go into too deep of an analysis right there, but the idea, going back to the game position, is that uh, what I'm trying to get him to do is look for more options. So he thought of queen to b3 and he played it very quickly, and we also want to look at other options. But queen to b3 is not a bad move. Queen to b3 is played. B6, now just defending because 7 was attacked. And then um, here, my student played bishop to f4, which actually is also a decent move. But again, we looked at this idea of knight to 5. Okay, I analyzed the game a little more after we looked at this. He takes d5 is also very. He takes d5, and then knight to e5 is very powerful with different checks here. For example, a lot of weaknesses along these light squares. So that was pretty neat. But if we go back here, knight to e5, and let's say bishop to f5, we were looking at c takes d5, c takes d5, and then this e4 move again. Okay, with the idea that, of course, here, for example, if d takes e4, then of course we have checkmate. In this case, let's take a look at a couple other moves. Let's say knight takes, then simply knight takes, and of course bishop takes. Then we have bishop to b5 check. Okay, and then no matter where, it's not going to be pretty. Knight takes d7, knight takes d7, and uh, black is going to lose his queen or checkmate it, something to that. So that wasn't good either. So let's go back here. But instead, white plays bishop to f4, which is a good developing move. So I guess one of the thoughts that I had for him was that he played well. He's playing some good moves, but especially when you have an opening or an idea like bishop to g4 that you haven't seen or you're not sure about, you should look for opportunities like the knight to e5 to attack it. Okay, so that's just one of the lessons that I wanted to get across. Okay, but let's keep looking at his game here. Bishop to f4, bishop takes f3. And his question was, should he take back with the g pawn or with the... And I think it's kind of preferential. He took with the e pawn, and I kind of like that because now he can castle over on the side. As you can see, because these pawns are advanced, the castling on the queen side would be a great idea. With e takes f3, this bishop also along here, and with all these the pressure that we're putting on these squares, this bishop coming out can be very effective at some point in the game. Okay, so he played he takes f3, which was very good. So back to that position. So he takes f3, knight b to d7, and here now black has a good opportunity. If you could look, this is just what they call a counting error, in that now we have one, two, highlight them, 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking this pawn, and we only have 1, 2 defending. So white can actually win a pawn here, and then in the analysis we actually found even more opportunity. So I thought that was pretty cool. So he didn't take this move, didn't take this pawn, but he should have. If you take here, then we take here, then a lot of opportunities here, actually. We do have bishop to b5, develop this rook here. There's a lot of danger. And in fact, one of the ideas we saw in analysis that was pretty interesting was knight to b5, okay, targeting 7, okay, with this fork. And if black were to defend against knight to c7, then we simply can take here. The threat is right there, trapping the queen. At some point, do that right away. We're attacking rook, and if the rook moves, let's say to say the rook goes back to a8, then here fairly annoying. Well, for the queen. Okay, for example, queen to c8. Then what can we even do? A rook to c1. Okay, so you can see white's in control of this position. All right, go back to the game. So after knight b d7, I think one of the things too is I think my student was trying to play, I guess you would say, strategically. So he played bishop to e2, just developing the bishop. Okay, and this is one of those cases where I actually commend what he was trying to do, because a lot of times beginning players will try to attack too early or try to just push tactically where there's no tactics to be found. So he was trying to play a very soundly in terms of his strategy. But in this particular case, he actually could have won some material. Okay, well, let's keep going here. Opponent plays e6, bolstering now that d5. And if we just take a look at this position, in terms of positional play, I think white has a little bit of an edge. Not a huge edge. The reason why is his minor pieces are developed. Okay, he's about to castle. Black still needs to develop, and then black has some of these weaknesses here that maybe can be exploited in the time that it takes for black to develop. But again, I don't think black is necessarily losing here, so it's okay. But let's see what happens here. So now white takes. C takes d5, and c takes d5, and here white castles. So again, I think white has a nice game going. He's got this isolated pawn, but there's really no way for black to take advantage of it. Okay? So after he castles, and just as a side note, instead of castling again, we looked at this idea of knight to b5. It's very dangerous. Rook to c8, again, lose that a pawn. Okay, I think black has to defend c7 because it gets into a lot of trouble. And here again, if the rook goes back, then we have that annoying. So you see that theme come out here, and squares, these light squares on the queen side, keep popping up in this particular opening. So something to think about your own games. Okay, let's go back to the game, and here white did castle instead of playing knight to b5. Bishop to e7 is played. He's trying to castle himself. Now he plays knight to b5. Okay. Well, black castles, and white, I think he does very well here. He plays rook a to c1, taking this open file, and you can see all of the squares here that are vulnerable for black, well, particularly c7. So after rook a to c1, rook to c8 is played, and here again, white could have just grabbed this pawn, could have taken it. Okay, and for example, if rook takes c1, rook takes c1, and now black's actually in a lot of trouble already here. Okay, so for example, let's see, 5, just trying to attack here, then we're going to get material out. Queen takes, knight takes. If he doesn't take this knight and he takes this bishop instead, then we take here with check. Okay, if he does take the knight, then the bishop can scoot back to safety. Okay, Hopefully that analysis doesn't confuse you too much. But instead, and again, there was fairly quick time control. And I was talking to him. He was saying that he kind of wanted to um, develop his other pieces, uh, and so he went ahead and he took on C8 instead. And this is a common um, little technique. You take the one rook, and after he takes back with the queen, you take over the file with rook to C1. Okay, now he has to move. Is of course queen to B7. We're going to talk about what happened there, but I just want to go back here real quick. So again, I think he made a fine choice in terms of what he was trying to do with positionally. He's trying to take over that file, use a technique which is very good, which is he captured because he see that he can move the queen over to the file. Then he could take it over by moving his other rook to the file. But um, at any level, whenever there's a free pawn, you want to see if it's worth it for you to take it. A lot of times, I played in the same. This game is from a tournament we played a couple weeks ago. He was playing in under 1200 section. I was playing in the open section, and I was playing. One of my opponents was rated around 1350, and um, it was not a super hard game to play because he lost a pawn the first 10 moves. So he was down a pawn, and then he was down another pawn later in the game, really for no compensation. So these little tactical errors, I talked about this in other videos, are important. They they can add up over time. So if you can avoid those or exploit those in your games, you're going to win a lot of chess games. But in any case, even at that, he's playing a nice. He's trying to play positionally. He's trying to take over the open file, which I think is good as well. But don't discount these pawns here and there. You have to at least look, okay, to see if it's going to work. So rook takes c8, queen takes c8, rook to c1. Now, what he should have played was something like queen to a8. Okay, because the problem that he runs into here is that he plays queen to b7, then rook to c6, forking two pieces. Okay, and now of course, this knight is protected by this knight, so you can't take it immediately. But the opponent plays queen to b8, which is a critical error. Now, again, like I said, both of these players are rated around 1,000, and so these errors are going to happen. But the key is the more you can, or the less you can make these types of errors, and the more you can exploit these type of errors, the more you're going to rise past that level. Okay, so instead of, let's just go back real quick. Instead of queen to b8, he could have played queen to a8, and still not great. In this case, rook takes a7 already, again, is very convincing. But with queen to b8, the game ends very quickly. Rook takes d7, because now we have a discovered attack. So the black, if black takes this rook, which is actually what happened in the game, then we take the queen. Now here, I mean, this is bad for, not very good for black at this point. But relatively best would have been queen takes f4. Then rook takes e7. Let's say he could throw this check in, but he's not going to. I'm sorry, queen to c1 check, but he's not going to, of course, checkmate the king, bishop to. Then we're going to bring out rook back here eventually. Let's say he plays rook to c8, then we can just take this pawn. So even though he has a c file, we're just up. See here, we are up a whole piece, and it's like 2 pawns. So that should be enough to win. But let's go back to what happened in the game. queen to b7, rook to c6, queen to b8, rook takes d7, and now he played knight takes d7, figuring he's going to get a rook, a piece for the queen. Bishop takes b8, knight takes b8. Here, doesn't really make a difference. He could have taken with the rook also, and white is winning already. Well, let's see how white finished off. Bishop to d3. So here, white is improving on his position. And I asked him, why aren't you taking this pawn on a7? And he said, I'm trying to, he's trying to maximize the effectiveness of his piece, which, again, I commend him on, and I guess it's something that is carried on from from what we've talked about. But sometimes, guys, it is simply best to take the pawn, okay? Especially when there's no danger to you. Okay. Well, let's finish up here. Rook to c8. So, of course, the threat is rook to c check. And now he decides to take the pawn, attacking the rook. And rook to c1 check. But again, there is no danger. Bishop to f1. Bishop to d6. Then queen to b6, threatening all sorts of stuff here. Check on check right here. Will pretty much do it, for example. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought in the comments. This type of video is a little different than what I've shown in the past, so would be very interested in your thoughts. If you are new to Better Chess Training, this channel is about helping you to improve your chess. So if that's something you are interested in, think about subscribing. Love to see you in future videos. Finally, just wanted to do a quick shout out to my patrons, specifically Team Backrank Brawler. That would be Daniel, Amy V, and Andy. I appreciate your support. If you'd like to check out becoming a Patreon, you can check out my Patreon page in the link in the description. Whether or not you become a patron or not, I really appreciate you watching videos, and I hope that you find them helpful. So check that out, and I'll see you next week.